I don't have a gavel, so forgive me. I will not break the glass. Hello, everyone, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, professors, academics, policymakers, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, considering how cold it is outside, I must commend you for managing to come through the cold and bringing some African heat and warmth with you to this very important event. Good morning again here in New York, and a big hello to those who are joining us online from around the world. My name is Ben Dotse Malo, Chief Editor at UN News. Welcome to day number 1 of this 4th Academic Conference on Africa, organized by the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, led by Under-Secretary General Christina Duarte. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is changing rapidly, not just because of artificial intelligence, but also because of the state of multilateralism, the state of governance and justice across the world, and especially in Africa. From the concept note we've all received, we are informed that 2/3 of all Africans believe that their countries, their nations are headed in the wrong direction. And most are dissatisfied with the quality of democracy that they are being given. And the questions arise, where is African wisdom? Where is African intellectual power, African thought, and African presence in the midst of all these challenges? What should Africa do? How should Africans be responding to these changes? These and many more questions should be answered over the next 3 days during this conference under the overarching theme, Seizing the Moment, the African State and its Promise. Is there a moment to be seized by all of us? What is the promise? Someone is about to tell us more about this. And for this first day, we will be focusing on the sub-theme, the state of the African state, presence, perception, and performance in a changing world. Before we go ahead, may I remind all of us that we have both English and French interpretations available through your earpieces. If you're a French speaker, I hope you can benefit from those speaking English. If you're an English speaker, when we have a French delivery, you should be able to follow us closely. But before I get carried away, we need to receive the welcome and opening remarks from the woman who is leading all this brilliant effort, the former finance minister of Cabo Verde, the current special advisor on Africa for the United Nations. She's still working even as I'm trying to introduce her. Under-Secretary General Christina Duarte, please put your hands together for her.
Good morning. What a beautiful room. Thank you so much. All protocols observed, allow me to jump to my remarks. We gather today under the timely theme, Seizing the Moment, the African State and its Promise. The promise of the African state is a question of presence, of performance, of transformation. But above all, it is a question of sovereignty. A conversation about state building in Africa cannot be dissociated from a conversation about sovereignty. These are not parallel debates. They are two sides of the same coin. The effectiveness of the African state, its legitimacy, and its capacity to deliver depend fundamentally on its ability to exercise sovereignty, not only in legal or geopolitical terms, but also in how it defines problems, sets priorities, and mobilizes its own knowledge and assets. In these remarks, I focus on a critical and often overlooked relationship: how building state requires building sovereignty, and how building sovereignty, in turn, requires confronting the internal constraints that shape our development trajectory, particularly the architecture of our mindset. This is not a rhetorical statement. It is a structural argument. If the state is to perform, it must be rooted in the realities of its societies, and that cannot happen without epistemic and cognitive sovereignty. No meaningful transformation can emerge from a policy architecture that is externally driven, intellectually outsourced, or disconnected from the structural and historical realities of the continent. There is no sovereignty without a sovereign mindset, and there is no sovereign mindset without sovereign scholarship. Africa's deficit is fundamentally a sovereign deficit, driven not solely by external constraints, but equally by internal ones. If you want to seize this moment, if you want to reimagine the African state for the 21st century, we must be willing to confront the internal architecture that governs our development choices. At the heart of that architecture lies the sovereignty of mindsets. The African state is often evaluated through an external lens: its presence, deliver, and legitimacy. But what of its internal constitution? What assumptions shape its design? What models shape its policies? And more important, what ambitions shape its aspirations? For decades, Africa has been governed not only by constitutions and policy frameworks, but also by inherited development logics. An implicit contract, in my opinion, of low ambition. This architecture of low ambition reduced the African state to a manager of scarcity, a distributor of external aid, a steward of external-driven reforms. It is a mindset forged in colonial logic, reinforced in post-independence economic orthodoxy, and naturalized in global development discourse. It treats structural transformation sometimes as a luxury, not a necessity. It defines Africa's reality by what it lacks, rather than by what it could become. This mindset is not simply ideological. It is institutionalized. It shapes planning frameworks, budgeting tools, and evaluation metrics. It defines success in terms of compliance, not transformation. It focuses on observative capacity, not productive capacity. And crucially, it teaches African states to manage poverty rather than development. So to change this mindset is not to reject reform. Is to reclaim the right to imagine a different future and to equip the state with intellectual and institutional instruments to pursue it. We cannot build sovereign states on the foundation of dependent thinking. We cannot design sovereign institutions if the intellectual frameworks used to design them remain extremely prescribed. The 21st century African state must be intellectually sovereign if it is to become politically, economically, and institutional sovereign. That brings me to the next frontier, the sovereignty of thinking or no sovereignty without scholarship. There is no sovereignty without scholarship. A sovereign state must possess not only the capacity to decide, but the epistemic infrastructure to know what it is deciding, why, and in what terms. Yet African scholarship remains marginal in shaping the policy choices of African states. This is not a benign omission. It's a structural vulnerability. Knowledge shapes policies. Policies shape systems. And systems shape destinies. When African knowledge is excluded from African policy making, three consequences follow. First, our development or Africa's development models become externally oriented, not locally grounded. Second, our Africa's intellectual sovereignty is outsourced to global institutions, even when they lack contextual legitimacy. And third, Africa's policy choice drift away from Africa's structures realities. So it is time to revalue African scholarship as a strategic asset, not just as an academic resource, but as a sovereign lever of state building. We must reconstitute our ministries, planning departments, and public service academics as knowledge institutions. We must position African universities not at the periphery of policy, but at the heart of it. And we must invest in long-term research ecosystems that serve the state, not just the market or donors. This requires a new compact between the African state and its intellectual infrastructure. A compact that treats African knowledge not as an input to be validated abroad, but as a sovereign asset to be leveraged at home. The African state must become the primary client of African knowledge, and African scholars must rise to meet the challenge, producing work that is rigorous, relevant, and rooted in the continent's reality. If the first frontier is the mindset, and the second is the sovereignty of thinking, then the next two frontiers are the downstream consequences of failing to confront the first two. The sovereignty over economic and financial flows is one such frontier. So Africa's persistent fiscal crises are not just a result of external debt cycles. They are a consequence of policy architectures that fail to domesticate and govern Africa's own financial flows. Then comes the frontier of digital sovereignty. Today, Africa generates data, but does not own it. Africa uses digital platforms, but do not govern them. Africa adopts algorithms, but do not design them. If we do not shift from access to agency, we'll move from aid dependency to algorithm dependency. In a world where power is increasingly embedded in code, the sovereignty of the African state will erode unless Africa claims digital control as a strategic imperative. This is not a rhetorical choice, it is a governance imperative. The future of the African state, its presence, its performance, its legitimacy, will be determined not only by how it delivers, but by how it thinks, by the models it adopts, by the ambitions it holds, and by the knowledge it builds. Let us not waste these moments. Let us seize it with sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado. Many thanks. Under Secretary General Cristina Duarte, very passionate about Africa and solutions to Africa's problems. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hand us over now to our keynote speaker. We are truly privileged to have right here with us. I remember last year we had to use a video which was delivered in Kikuyu. This morning, it's just such an honor to have this distinguished African. Many people believe he should have received the Nobel Prize for Literature. He's a distinguished professor of literature at Bard College. He's an acclaimed novelist, a proud Somali, a proud African. Would you please put your hands together, help me welcome Professor Nuruddin Farah. Mehed Senate, thank you.
Well, what is it they say? All protocol observed. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be standing in front of you. I would be teaching, I would be in class now as we speak, but I prefer being in front of you today rather than standing or talking to something like 17 students. I am the fourth son of a large family, a position which, to a degree, proved beneficial to my intellectual growth, as my older brothers guided and taught me, and as they answered the questions my parents could not answer or would not. That many of the adults in the community had no answers for my questions alienated me in a manner that made me unworthy of my self-esteem. I had little respect for many of the adults because they failed in satisfying my curiosity. It's no accident, then, that I discovered a safe space and place in a home that was all mine, a home with a door and a key, my own wonderland, in which I wandered freely in its many-roomed spaciousness, roaming, unafraid, content with the life I'd led, undisturbed, unpunished, unforced. Books became my home. My imagination was my refuge, and I took shelter in them when I fled from the beatings of adults. Now from the turmoil, within or without, now from the adults prepared to punish me. No wonder. I was caned by the teacher on my first day at school. Later the same day, when one of my older brothers reported me to my parents, I received harshly worded words from my mother and a beating from my father. Punishments, my mischief, if that was what it was, and I doubted it at the time, did not deserve. I suppose I was disciplined, not because I did something deserving of sanction, but because my teacher and my parents were preparing me for what might be done to a child who, in their view, misbehaved. My misdeed was this. I had failed to give my name to the teacher. When he instructed me to stand up on the first day of class and said, and to give my name, I could not make sense of the fact that the teacher who lived in our house and who knew my name all right insisted that I answered the question, "Who are you?" I refused to do so, willfully ascertain that I had forgotten. Maybe because he placed the emphasis of the word "who" in the question, "Who are you?" It might never have occurred to my parents or my teacher that I would have gladly answered any other question, but not this one, because there was no knowing where a true answer might lead me. No knowing if I had the competence to deal with the question adequately. After all, I was a mere 5 going on 6, then too inexperienced to voice my doubts, too green to speak of them with seasonable certitude to total strangers. To date, I do not know how to answer that question with the suitable sauciness of a man who has just celebrated his 80th birthday. Looking back on it now, I can't help thinking that I did the right thing, not answering the question. That way, I parried taking on my teachers and parents, behaving with unprecedented bravery like a mare on heat. However, had I known then what I came to know later, I might have described my condition as a post-colonial child and then chronicled how, as an infant, I had been dropped into the deep end of highly troubled waters and abandoned inescapably in a tributary crawling with leeches from alien lands, leeches which would cadge off me and in the end weaken me. Unawares, I became other to myself, to my parents, my brothers and my playmates, and I would suffer incalculable after effects as a grown-up man. Not so fast, though, not so fast. It was much later that I understood that my experience was the experience of on many other children in Africa, raised in a cultural, psychological, and historical reconfiguration. I belong to many worlds when, truly, I belong to none. You would have to have been a child of a similar background or to have lived a life like mine to comprehend the debilitating nature of what I had experienced as a child. An experience that left indelible marks on a growing mind when it came to my mental development. In short, I felt I became an altogether different person, someone who is literate, not in his own language, but in several others. For I spoke Somali at home and everywhere else, but I could neither read nor write in it, because Somali had no standardized script. In addition to being caned on my first day at school, I was taught the alphabet in Arabic, preparing me for the day when I would read and recite the Quran in a language I could neither speak nor understand. And even though I would not describe them as illiterate, the truth is that my parents themselves could barely read and write, even though they belonged to a literate, albeit oral, culture in which poetry in its oral form reigned supreme. In Islam, the first revealed word that the archangel spoke to Prophet Muhammad, an ummi, meaning an illiterate, was a command, Iqra, meaning read in Arabic. The word Iqra is a world of a word, a command charged with potential, the starting point of a revolution in which literacy becomes preeminently purposeful and driven by the divine will to turn that area of the world which had until then been populated by illiterate Bedouin Arabs, comprised of warring clans fighting over the right of watering their camels at oases in the desert, freely murdering and drinking one another's blood at will. The word turned these people into a literate people. And the Quran, because the word means reader, would turn these disparate communities into one people, united in a monotheistic belief system with a manifesto. The sacred word would enable the Arabs to lord it over all the lesser peoples like Somalis, and many other nations who became Muslims. As a child, I learned to make the sacred sounds of the sacred text revealed via dictation to the Prophet of Islam, without comprehending the meaning of the words. Still, I enjoyed rocking my entire body, chanting the verses in rhythm to the rise and fall of the words, as I submitted my soul and body to the service of the divine, missing not one of the text's intended subtleties. We were made to understand that only when reading it aloud, with the entirety of our bodies living in the text, with the sacred word, with the sacred word's inviolability, assume its hallowed nature. Amen. Later, I learned to read and write in several other languages. English is my fourth language. And started to define literacy as more than alphabetical literacy, encompassing a large set of skills, including job-specific skills, digital, numerical, health, media, technological, and other forms of literacy. One needs to keep up with the expanding and evolving skills that you must master so you can think of yourself as a fully literate person. Is Africa ready for the 21st century and its literacy needs, especially when you consider the ill-informed, ill-advised decision taken recently by Nigeria's Federal Minister of Education, denying the country's education to be children to be educated in their mother tongues. As someone who loves Nigeria and lived in it for almost 12 years, and who on top of this have children who are part Nigerian, I felt disturbed by this hasty policy reversal, which will do irreparable damage to the country's children. It does not make sense to take this unwarranted decision when we all know that the states or the federal government have not seriously invested or promoted mother tongue teaching, nor adequately trained teachers to meet the demanding needs of this policy. Nor has sufficient time been given to determine the efficacy of the policy before reversing it. My feeling is that this decision will make Nigeria less ready for the 21st century if you put this policy in place. While there has been significant progress in many countries in the continent, challenges persist, including the digital divide, lack of infrastructure, and insufficient digital health and technological skills training. Reading, writing, and computer skills among children are improving, but not in home languages, a bane in Africa. This latter area requires more focused attention. No human development is possible without paying full attention to these and other forms of technological, digital, and numerical literacy. I got into political trouble when I published a trilogy on dictatorship and became persona non grata in my own country. Exile then propelled me into a peripatetic existence. And benefiting from this, I lived in all the major regions of Africa, determined to base myself in the continent, not in Europe or the USA. This way acquiring a transnational identity. The Lord knows Africa's internal migration is cumbersome. What with the expensive flights involved, if you travel from one country to another, you will know this. Not to mention the difficulties of obtaining visas or permits, allowing one to cross the borders beyond the regional blocks. It may take a Ghanaian several months to obtain a visa to enter Botswana. Equally, a Zambian may require half a year to be issued with a Nigerian visa. And yet, everyone else comes to Africa without the need of a visa. Shame on us. Even so, I don't think you can talk about present-day Africa without also talking about the brain drain, driven by several factors, including better pay elsewhere, professional advancement overseas. The continent's large-scale departures of skilled people has led to shortages that have affected the running of several departments in many countries. It takes 20+ years to train a highly skilled worker in any field. However, the sad truth is that it takes a mere email or a letter from a company or government body in another country or continent to employ an African who cost the continent and its people thousands of dollars to train. So, what are the options open to Africa? Short of requiring another 20 or so years to replace those who departed for another continent or country. Would the new country harvesting our fruits be willing to pay recompense for the loss of the continent's skilled personnel? We know too that Africa continues to lose worthy earth minerals for much less than they are worth in real terms. And so, what are the options, my brothers and sisters? I hope this gathering can come up with an answer to these burning questions, and I thank you.
Wow. Professor Nuruddin Farah, a lot of food for thought. I got punished in primary school, but not on the first day. There was a particular mathematics, arithmetic, they called it. He would get on a chair and pull our ears up when we got something wrong. So I could directly identify with all that you mentioned. The brain drain you mentioned, how do we turn it into a brain gain? And I think there are many of us in this hall who maybe should be back in Nigeria or Somalia, turning the drain into a gain. A lot of things to think of. And a borderless Africa. I think it was Dangote, Africa's richest multimillionaire, who mentioned at one of the platforms that he was struggling to get into several African nations where he was going to put investment because of visa issues. And sometimes we have to go to Europe in order to come back to Africa. Professor Nuruddin Farah, there is a lot you've given us to think about. And we hope that in the next day, 2 days, 3 days, we can find solutions. Thank you for your scholarship, and thank you very much for sharing your deep thoughts with us. We can continue debating things. Let me just state that for anyone who wants people outside to follow what is happening in this hall, please advise them to try webtv.un.org. And if they just put the search Academic Conference for Africa 2025, they will be able to follow. They are also trying to make sure that our YouTube channel is also able to provide all that we need. Thank you again, Professor Nuruddin Farah. Now, to move ahead, here is what we are going to do. 2 major things over the next couple of hours. We're going to have a panel discussion followed by a 1-hour interactive session. Everyone participating here in person or anyone joining us online will be encouraged to play a part, either through questions, through comments, or through the offer of solutions. And for those online, please again go to webtv.un.org. Excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to turn to a distinguished panel who will do a lot of good to many of the issues that we are discussing under this theme, the state of Africa. The presence and then the performance parts of it. I should have Honorable Dr. Willie Mutunga, but I don't think he's here, former Chief Justice and President. He's online. Honorable former Chief Justice of Kenya, Dr. Willie Mutunga, do we have you online?
Yes.
Karibu.
Asante. I'm actually from the, I think I speak after 2 people, so.
Yes, we just want to know that you are live with us, and we are delighted. Asante sana.
Asante sana.
Okay, so Honorable Willie Mutunga is here. I am having Professor Moju Baolu Olufunke Okome, Professor of Political Science African and Women's Studies, Leonard and Claire Tow, Professor, Brooklyn College, CUNY. We have my brother from Ethiopia. He was surprised. I told him I was from a village in Ethiopia, and he nearly believed me to be coming from Adama. Dr. Iyob Balcha Gebremariam, Perivoli Africa Research Center, University of Bristol in the UK. And last but not least, the bright and brilliant Professor Beyi Soyinka Ariwele, who is going to be the moderator for this panel we are going to have. I think I should hand over to her and just sit back and act as a bodyguard. Over to you.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. It's amazing to be here with everyone at this very critical moment, not just in African history, but certainly for the global system as a whole. I don't think we have to say or mention how urgent and compelling these conversations are at this time. I would like to thank our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Farah, for so perfectly capturing this connection between the world of our human and African creativity and the unleashing of our potential for meeting this very critical demands of this present moment. I was struck by the provocation and the challenge that was embedded in the way you spoke of the stifling of a creative mind, through the asking of questions, through beatings and disciplinary sanctions that were designed to create a form of conformity to meet the expectations of this world. But those stories reminded us of how desperately we find that our neocolonial existence in Africa and as Black people kind of repeats and reinforces that splitting of our identities and our wholeness, our capacity to ask questions, to reshape our world, to demand that the world respond in an urgent, meaningful, and in a just manner. And I think those are the things that lead to the erosion of our sovereignty, of which we are really, really honored to have had the office of Ms. Christina Duarte and the Under-Secretary General and United Nations Special Advisor on Africa speak to us about that challenge of the debasement of our sovereignty. I thought when you were speaking, not just about the idea of sovereignty as a static norm, how we teach in schools, sovereignty means this, but how you brought out the idea that it's a project, it's a building, and it's a building that we have to think what goes into the construction. Use the word architecture, the edifice, and brought to our attention the need for us to imagine it from a very, not just intellectual, policy-based notion, but deeping into all the resources and the materials that we need. Thank you for reminding us of the idea of sovereignty as a process of building. When a building collapses, you start again, you reconstruct, and I think that's why we are gathered today. I want to thank your staff, Ms. Ndidi Anyegbuna, Teresa Aranas, for their incredible persistence working with you, with your office, over the past 3 years to bring together scholars and practitioners in the homeland and the diaspora to find a pathway that embodies our shared determination to find a way out of the long-standing crisis in which we find ourselves today. I feel so honored to be here with everyone. I've listened to many of those who are gathered here, distinguished guests, excellencies, and all those other wonderful protocols. It's more than protocol. I've gained as a person from listening and reading and learning from my colleagues who are on the panel here. They serve as people who have molded nations, having the honor of Professor Mutunga, who was a former Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court of Kenya, Professor Gebremariam, who works as a research associate at the Perivoli Center at Bristol, but I've enjoyed your work on coloniality and your call for epistemic justice through a retrieval of African knowledge sovereignty. So when you spoke about the knowledge sovereignty, I was reminded about some of the work you've done. And of course, Professor Mojuba Olu, you don't want to mess with her name. Olufunke Okome. Everything is accented, talking about digital sovereignty. You're scared when you spell her name because you better have those marks going the right way. And she is not just a professor, but she is a scholar of international distinction, working with governments in Africa, mentoring incredible clans of young Africans to transform their thinking around gender advocacy. And she was the founder of the Bring Back Our Girls movement in New York City. This moment is critical because we are tired. If we come here because it's another academic conference, I think we're wasting our time. I'm just going to be candid. We are tired, we're frustrated, we are fed up with words like renewal and transformation that we stick up as platitudes to cover the tired words that have been utilized over time to describe African countries. We've gone from developing, underdeveloped, less developed, industrializing, less industrialized, third world, global south, patrimonial states, vulnerable states, fragile states, weak states, failed states. And today, we're talking about the state of the state. Of the African states, and we're wondering what label. And I've been amazed to see the absent state. It's one of the things we want to talk about and to interrogate. How well does this meet our assessment? Where does it take us? When do we drop the platitudes? When do we go to the fact that the promises of mobilizations and uprisings happening across the African continent today point us to hope, but they also tell you of a rise of tiredness, of disenchantment with where things are, disaffection. It's the Japa movement, the movement of people out of the continent, the alternative forms of government. The state may be absent, but we also want to interrogate the fact that African people are not just having absent states, if we want to use that terminology, but they are governed by multiple governmentalities. They live under the weight of cultural governmentalities, religious governmentalities, street boy governmentalities, mafia, criminal networks. Your life is governed as an African citizen by multiple governmentalities, including our wonderful host, the United Nations, and multilateral governmentalities. So we're going to try, I think, to open up some of those questions. What is the state of the African state today? What explains where we are? What explains the gap between the perception of the need of the state presence, and this gap between the presence and people's reality? So we're going to start with very short takes from each of our panelists, and thereafter we're going to engage in very, I hope, robust, critical conversations. And we'll be joined after that by respondents and then the audience. So I'm going to call on our good friend, Professor Eyob Gebremariam, to start us off with a short take. When you go past the time that I mentioned, 5 minutes, we start a round of applause in appreciation of where you are. All right, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Pei. That's really a great introduction. I'm honored to be here to share my views and perspectives. I get really inspired by the opening speech by Madame Duarte and also our keynote speaker, Professor. It's a great privilege. So just to be conscious of the time, the core message that I would like to pass forward are two. The first one is the African state as we know it is still under heavy historical burden that's manifested in two distinct forms in my understanding. One, in physical terms, two, in epistemic terms. The physical burden of the African state is very much attached with the physical borders that we have across the continent. imagine we are still stick with a physical border that was designed by the Berlin Conference, by the colonial masters, just for the sake of ensuring colonial domination, exploitation, and subjugation. And what we have at the moment, all the passport positionality, all the problem of movement across the continent is a continued manifestation of this physical burden that's to some extent even created non-viable states that are too small to even to play a functional role as a state. The epistemic aspect of the burden is essentially, Pei was referring to it. We study African states for what they are not, and instead of for who they are. And the Eurocentric perspective, the Westphalian understanding of a state having A, B, C characteristics is always used as the only framework through which that African states are studied, so that the usual conclusion is they are failed state, absent state, or all the meanings attached to it. The second core message that I have is derived from this colonial burden is African states are trapped into this neo-colonial empire of political economic subjugation. And I want to share a story to explain this. In mid-1990s, Ethiopia was negotiating with the IMF for extended structural adjustment program to get cheap credit. And of course, you know, the conditionalities that the IMF put to put such kinds of credits available, right? All the neoclassical parameters. But Ethiopia quickly get into trouble with the IMF for one particular reason. What happened in mid-1990s was, anyone who have traveled across the continent may know that Ethiopian Airlines is one of the big national carriers. So in mid-1990s, Ethiopian Airlines borrowed from an American bank to buy airplanes, but the deal to borrow the money was such erroneous, and the bank tried to seize back the airplanes as a way of also putting pressure on this national carrier. And what the Ethiopian government did by that time was to take money from the national account and give the money to the Ethiopian airline to settle the entire debt. And this was quite a huge action, especially in the eyes of the IMF, who put all those, neoclassical characteristics of, keeping this much amount of money in your national account. So what happened was the bank went to the Federal Reserve in the US to complain about this third world country intervening into my operation. Then the National Reserve went to the IMF, how would you dare to allow this country to mess into our bank's operation? Then the IMF became a big boss trying to push Ethiopia, even trying to discipline Ethiopia for doing that, and almost kind of creating a burden, Ethiopia from benefiting from this highly indebted country's debt cancellation process. So the reason I'm telling this story is that even the moment that African states or African governments dare to do things that are relevant and important for their own nations, they keep on being disciplined and challenged by the global neo-colonial empire framework that still continue to shape and determine the way we operate. So what? Two things. One, we need to acknowledge, understand, and recognize that both the epistemic and the physical boundaries within which that African states are operating is the starting point of our problem. I 100% agree with the statement that Madame Duarte made. Second one, to deal with this imperial neo-colonial system, we still need to understand and adequately recognize it. There are lots of studies that explain all these issues. The problem is we keep on using the same framework to find solutions, which is designed to keep the continent in its current state. We are using it, we are applying it to find solutions. We have to recognize that we are in epistemic cul-de-sac, trapped into that location. So we need to dare to imagine the alternatives. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gabriel. You just raised a real challenge for us there. If we're in an epistemic cul-de-sac, stuck in that place, how do we wiggle our way out? And I want to remind everyone that tomorrow and on Wednesday is a continuation where we're going from setting the stage with analysis today to deepening the conversation by looking at that question. How do we break out of that crisis where there's an epistemic, grip, literally, and we keep utilizing the problem to try and find a solution, the same problem to find a solution, which is obviously not working very well. So thank you for raising that critical issue. Professor Okome, over to you now.
Well, I'm at a disadvantage because I don't know how to be brief, but
That's why I looked at her.
She's a hard task mistress, so, Thank you very much, Madam Duarte. Thank you, Professor, for your just beautiful interventions. I am the child of two teachers. So it wasn't only in school that I got punished. I got punished doubly at home because I disgraced my parents by not being the perfect student, asking too many questions, refusing to take instruction, and showing them up as not, that great teacher. So, and then I didn't like math or understand it. My father was a math whiz, so he took it personally. Also, I went to a lot of religious schools, and we used to go to Catholic church because I was in boarding school. It was short, their services. Everything was in Latin in that time. We didn't understand anything, and there was no singing, no dancing. You had to, So the violence of even the Christianity that I was being steeped in was extreme. Plus, Jesus is still white in many African churches. So let me just go to my presentation. And I'm kind of divided because, we need to be brief. But I have been preoccupied with a lot of these issues from right when I began my graduate studies in 1981. Actually, from when I was an undergraduate in the mid to late 1970s. Maybe I should read a paper. The UN and Africa, what I think is that there's a need for decolonizing because African countries were not here when the UN was formed. And I don't think we are we're high on the agenda of the United Nations in terms of, being either powerful or having the voice or power to effectuate any transformation in our continent. You can see it in the Security Council. Where are the Africans in the permanent seat? Okay, so when we look at the crisis of the African state, it's not just a consequence of weakness. It's a consequence of the structural pathology that we inherited from colonialism and the imperialism that framed it. And this has been perpetuated by the post-colonial that is not really post, that set up internal patronage systems, and externally we're beset by attempts to perpetually marginalize the continent economically, in its economy. Otherwise, why would we have a continent that's so rich in natural resources and the people are poor? Why would we have all these colonial obsessions with extracting minerals, even people? I'm an extract, Nigeria educated me. America is benefiting from it. So We, both within and without, we are beset by consequential, I think, tragedies from which we have not extricated ourselves. So I see the problem of the African state as multifaceted. There's structural and political and economic as well as institutional failures. We can't deny that. But I say that this is rooted in our colonial inheritance and in our continued marginalization within the global economic system. And when I talk about colonialism, a lot of Africans get upset and say, that happened a long time ago. Get over it. You know, our people are in charge now. Our people are not in charge. We're still being colonized. And part of the colonization is taking place with the multilateral agencies like the IMF, the World Bank, so to some extent the United Nations also, except the UN doesn't have much money, you know. So we are lucky that way. You know, so we are still being colonized. And everybody has an opinion on what Africa should do. But everybody that has an opinion is part of the problem. And they really do not want these problems to be solved. But what about Africans? Well, I think when you're thinking about the epistemology of this thing, and you're thinking about the way in which our educational systems are still colonial, Africans might as well not be Africans. You know, a lot of us are even very happy with the way in which we can fit in. Once we get to the West, you know, we are citizens of the world. We speak perfect, like me, English. We were beaten into speaking this English. In high school, they beat us. They made us cut grass for speaking vernacular. And now, when people talk about the violence that was done to indigenous people in terms of language, Africans don't even talk because we're happy with that level of coloniality. And I'm glad I can speak English, but I can speak Yoruba too. I insisted on doing Yoruba as a subject to the chagrin of my high school teachers who thought we should all learn French. So, je ne comprends pas français. And that's why I accent my name. So, you know, the state should have rescued us. But it's a paradox that's present but absent. You see it simultaneously, intensely present, and functionally absent. It's present in the sense that it's highly dominant as the central source of wealth, power, and patronage. It operates as an authoritarian bureaucratic apparatus of control and projects this facade of the modern state with power and technical expertise. You know, they're all in air-conditioned rooms in places where there's no electricity. They're happy with that. Access to this state apparatus is key to accumulating wealth. But you know what? Look at America very well. That's the way it is too. You know, Trump is showing us that that's the way it is. You know, if people are confused about this, and they were saying, oh, African state is corrupt, corruption is here too. We learned it from the West, and I do say we're still interns, you know, when it comes to that. But, you know, there's an absence also. Because despite its, excuse me, I'm at the UN, maybe I should have more decorum. Despite the pervasive presence of the state, it is very weak, if we're going to be kind. It's fragile. It's functionally deficient. It's unable to perform the core functions, like assuring basic security. Read the news about Nigeria, and it breaks my heart and takes up a lot of my time and energy. The rule of law, absent. I'm not talking about the rule of law that just guarantees property rights the way the World Bank wants us to do it, but the actual rule of law. And I don't have time to go into it. Oh, my time is almost up. Or, you know, it doesn't provide basic services. Where's the clean water? Where's the electricity? Where are the majority of the people? Nigeria, my country, has more than 130 million multi-dimensionally poor people. And we have a government, we have a state. Is that their priority? how to take these people out of poverty. And I hear a lot of fine rhetoric, mind you, but I'm not impressed at all. And it is abysmal that this is where we are. So the claim of the state to a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force is often challenged by armed groups that are even better armed sometimes than the state security forces. So we have internal pathologies, institutional failures. We also have the multilateral organizations and civil society deeply invested in a kind of dysfunctional relationship with Africa. And all of them have good intentions, but the road to hell is lined with good intentions. I can't go into my whole thing because Madam Moderator is terrorizing me, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Okome, and thank you for recognizing the kind of the military mob right beside you. Really appreciate the things that you raised, from the personal, utilizing the individual experience, again, like Prof said, to help us understand the ways in which we are forced and we're constructed into these systems of hegemony that we then struggle to break out of. Sometimes we really need to think deeply about how we were made into who we are. And that process of being made, not just to be, but to find pleasure in being, I think is the power of coloniality. That eventually the person who is the colonized subject begins to desire and seek. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles. It's not just pointing out the problem, but that these things have become the object of our affection. And so on one hand, we're talking about knowledge sovereignty. On the other hand, we are creating systems that thirst in many ways, lay out for most Africans, from social media to television and the films. The West becomes the object of our affection. And so breaking that cycle of re-enslavement, recolonization, recognizing it not just as an ideological war of words. It's not just about being PC, but that it's deeply impacting our lives. It's deeply impacting the capacity of the state to respond to the needs, to our needs to survive and compete in the world. I think that's one of the most critical struggles that we have today. And with that, I'm going to call on our good friend, Professor Dr. Willy Mutunga, who is joining us all the way from Kenya. Welcome, Honorable Dr. Mutunga. I'm never sure exactly how to preface the titles. Are you there and connected?
Yes, sir.
We would like to welcome you for very brief initial thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. So I've read the concept note, and my reflection in the next 5 minutes is anchored in 3 questions and not solutions. The first question that I have is, after reading the concept note, can we really delink the African state from its political leadership? That's the first question that I have. And the political leadership has been mentioned, not directly, but the effects of it have been stated by the previous speakers. And the second question I have is, does the current African leadership find African scholarship indispensable? And if so, which African scholarship? Is it the scholarship of the great names on page 2? On page 2 of the concept note, the names, and I'll repeat these, great names. Mamudani, Professor Mahmoud Mamudani, the great Walter Rodney, who was my professor when I was reading law in Dar es Salaam in the 70s, Mkandawire, Naidu, are these, is this what we're talking about? Or, is this the leadership which we're talking about? And my third question, and this also is something that I think has been touched upon. Should we not discuss the state of the planet and its linkages to Africa's plight, or the international system, that is undergoing renewal? Those are some of the questions I'm putting forward, because at the moment I'm excited and excited about the state of the planet and the debates that are taking place, not among lawyers, but among other disciplines. Because as lawyers, although we call ourselves learned, we rarely discuss the wisdom of other disciplines. So this state of the planet, myself, what kind of the current planet, I find it not just, I don't find it peaceful. I don't find the planet not, I don't find it gender just. I find it homophobic. I find it not a state that is, supports, humanity. And I think that's why I want to look at what is happening in the state, in the planet at the moment. Whether there are debates on socialism, whether there are debates, on imperialism, whether there are debates on sexually liberated planets that the feminists are discussing, and whether these discussions then are the kind of discussions that the African, political leadership are interested in. In my experience in Kenya, is the leadership in political leadership in Kenya is not interested, in those particular, discussions, and we might want to ask ourselves how the African leadership, will listen to us, and whether the AU can even do anything, beyond their abstract manifestos. And that's it, my sister. I've finished my questions before my 5 minutes are up, to avoid your wrath.
Thank you so much, sir. I love the questions that you raised, because, it's so easy to jump into the policy debates without going for these deeper questions. And honestly, the last question that Professor Mutunga asked, to me, goes to the heart of this language that I want us to all talk about very quickly, panelists. The idea of state absence. The question he says is the state even interested? Is the state even interested in these larger ideals and values that we are fighting to have? The health of the world, the health of the nation, the health of the citizens. And so I want to ask you, I was reading the promotion of durable peace through sustainable development in Africa, which was by Madame Duarte's address, the 2025, address on this. And there's a section there that I want to throw out. It says, the absence of the state does not mean a complete lack of governance, but refers to critical gaps in the state's functional presence, delivering essential public services, ensuring equitable development, maintaining legitimacy. And so it's defined here in the way we mostly think about it, functional gaps, the functional capacity, the failure to build legitimacy, to promote peace, to be there as we imagine the state should be. But as Professor Mutunga was saying just now, is the state even really interested? And I'm asking you, are we dealing with what I'm imagining, not just as state absence, but when you interrogate that, are we dealing with a retreat, in many ways, of the states that have the capacity to deliver? So there are states that are hindered and hampered in their capacity, and you've all spoken about coloniality and the neocolonial systems. But at this other level, we are also, I think, looking at the idea of state retreat. And one of the ways I think it becomes really apparent, just to use some anecdotes, is the idea that the state would rather imagine itself, many of our political leaders, as those who, the citizens become beneficiaries of their largesse, not as a right. It's not your right to durable peace. It's when I choose to give you. And there's a dividend for the state in that. I hope it doesn't get too, what I'm saying is not too complicated, in the sense that you would see governments bestowing arbitrarily a scholarship to somebody they meet. There might be a bread seller on the streets in Nairobi. And the president goes by and says, I'm going to make you, a secretary, charity. Are we seeing an alternative form of the absent state that wants to rule by charity? So it abdicates its idea of responsibility and accountability and reconstitutes itself as this retreating state that cannot be held accountable for what it is not promising to give. So whether it's anchored by the IMF or by other organizations that say, retreat from social services, make people pay, is the state all too happy to retreat from there? And I think we're seeing that increasingly happening in many African countries, where then the people have to respond by treating the state like royalty. Thank you for granting us anything you throw at us. What are your thoughts on the idea of absence? Is it changing the relationships between citizens and their state at a fundamental level? Is the problem a little deeper than how we imagine in terms of state function? Is there an emerging philosophy? What are you thinking?
Thank you. I think my response is very much related to what you said in the last sentence of your question. That is, the state is not a thing. It's not a particular object that we can say that it's present or absent. I think we need to challenge our understanding. The state's functionality is essentially shaped by its relational engagement with different segments and portions of society. If its relational engagement favors a particular group of people, social, economic, cultural groups, we see its main attributes very much aligned to those segments of society with which that it has more relation, or who has more control over the state apparatus will determine or shape the major aspect of that relationship, both vis-a-vis the citizens or the global or actors. Again, I would like to share another story. In 2023, October, I was attending the African Studies Association of Africa conference in Lubumbashi, DRC. Okay? So I was in the UK, so I flew through Addis to go to Lubumbashi. On my return from Lubumbashi, we flew from Lubumbashi for almost, 4 or 5 hours. And the moment we arrived in Addis, I was about to continue my flight to the UK. There was one airport official on the stairs in Addis saying that, anyone to Kinshasa, anyone to Kinshasa. That means people travel from Lubumbashi to Kinshasa via Addis Ababa. Okay. DRC, especially Lubumbashi, the Katanga region, is one of the wealthiest regions across the world, where all of our devices, the key elements of our device are using is extracted from. Are we saying that there is no state in the DRC? Yes, there is a state, but its functional relationship and the relationality is significantly shaped by all those extractivist industries, all those multinational corporations that are determining the way that it's operating, to the extent that a wealthiest country across the world cannot have a functional airline link between its two major cities. We have countries like Niger, Chad, or Central African Republic, who are part of the French neo-colonial empire. If you go to France by this time, you'll have almost 70% of its energy is produced through nuclear power plants. France doesn't have any uranium ore. That uranium is extracted particularly from these 3-4 Central African countries. Are we saying that there is no state in Central Niger or Chad? Yes, there is, but its functionality is essentially shaped by those who are in control of it and shape the way that it serves a particular purpose, which is the neo-colonial purpose. So I think instead of going into this trap of binary of presence or absence, failed or strong, I think we better understand to which actor is the African state primarily responding to, so that we understand that dynamics. Otherwise, we will keep on wandering around a very narrow corner, which I still consider a very epistemical defect. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that you raised the question of those actors and what it means that the state is responding to those actors. Can we push that dialogue a little bit more? Professor Kome, talking about the actors, you spoke earlier about the United Nations, but some of these other actors, can we go deeper?
So I think it's clear that there's institutional failure. I don't think that even the question of whether the African state is willing or whatever, I think there's a state. Whom does I agree, state see as its primary constituency? To whom is it responsible? And people smarter than me have pointed out that, there's a politics of the belly, or what Nigerians call stomach infrastructure, that is central to our whole being of the state, so that the people who have access to power run the system as personalistic, materialistic, opportunistic, and they're looking for power just to eat, to devour state resources, to kleptocratize everything. And what they're doing is not transparent. You have to be part of the in-group. It's almost like a cult. Then there's also the way in which that affects the nature of politics within. But I see the masterminds as external actors, I agree. The US needs rare earth minerals. It doesn't care how it gets it out of Africa. And us Africans, we run to the US. Some people are demonstrating in Washington, D.C., begging the US to come and rescue Nigerian Christians because there's genocide in Nigeria, So, our minds are colonized because we cannot even see ourselves as worthy of rescuing ourselves from the predicaments in which we are. I am not saying that there are no good-intentioned people, but you know what I think about good intentions. If you don't rescue yourself and you don't prioritize your own, integrity as a human being, why should somebody else come and respect it? And you see this on the part of the state, the occupants of the seats of power. You see it on the side of the people. And for me, it's our colonial education and the way in which it still has captured our minds that make us prey to this thing of we want to be perpetually rescued. We think there's a magic formula. I like the title of Yoran Hiden's book. There are no shortcuts to progress. If we want to grow, we have to struggle. And that struggle has to be among us to rescue ourselves, because all the people we're looking to are not going to do it. Now, about the external world also, part of my research, PhD, 1980s, I took a long time, to 90s, was the US and its allies decided that they were going to cut development assistance to African states. If you see all these NGOs flourishing, it's because they decided to put resources in NGOs as the third sector. And I'm not saying they are not good NGOs, but the NGOs also are not accountable to African people, but to their funders. And they dance to the agenda of the funders because that's how you will get money. So we are not even controlling the institutions and structures within our boundaries. So we have considered that we have no power. We have agreed that they're coming to help us. We even beg them to come and help us. And when things fail, we are blamed. So I don't think the blame is just for the African state. It is also for these, external actors, very powerful countries, the hegemon in place right now, the US, and its allies who have their national interests very clear in their minds, and it informs what they do in their interactions with our continent. So that's my reading of it, that you see this dysfunctionality. It's coming from the outside. It's also coming from the inside. We had been pre-colonized. We're still there because we refuse to decolonize our education. To say education for what? Who are the people that we are accountable to? And how many should they be? Should it be only Dangote and a few Nigerians? Or should it be majority of Nigerians that are able to thrive? And everybody that is struggling in the continent and putting food on the table should be applauded, because the absence of the state is making life unbearable. But people are still working hard to survive. And I applaud the most some of our younger people are in the tech field, and they're making waves. They should be supported. Their efforts should be scaled up. We don't have a developmental state in many African countries that would do this work. It's about time we rescued ourselves and did this, instead of coming back next year talking about the same thing.
Thank you, Prof.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Because you opened up the question of the foreign actors, and I want to push it. You mentioned, repeatedly, and I think this is really critical, good intentions. And I think for many people, in the absence of the state, the idea of the good intentions, the good actors, has been filled with what we call civil society. And the notions that we have about civil society, I want us to talk a little bit. Maybe I'll call on Professor Mutunga if he wants to chip in here. The idea that civil society becomes this alternative space to make up for the dwindling legitimacy of the state, I think we need to push a little bit more. Because today, in many African countries, it is, we call, civil society that's taking on the healthcare needs of the society. It is so-called civil society that is rebuilding schools. It is alumni associations that are doing scholarships. It is civil society that is running electricity in communities. It is civil society that is running community security. Last year, about this time last year, a college-aged niece of mine, living in a housing estate, had a terrifying seizure late at night. And so I was called in the US. She's having a seizure. The gates to the housing estate were locked because civil society runs it All right? So talking about the absence of the state, we're talking about what has moved into that space. And I think it's critical to dismantle and talk about how we fund, support, and talk about civil society as though it is a good. It is a good, but is it making up? Is it supposed to be substituting for the role of the state? How do we balance our support for civil society with the need to grow and demand accountability of the state? That night, at about midnight, I'm calling the police in the state where she is to say, could you find a way to go open the gates, calling from the US to an African country, to say, could you open the gates so that she can come out? And you know what they told me? The very nice police officer said, do you know the name of the chairperson of the housing estate? Maybe we can get him to open the gates so she can go out and get to the hospital. The ambulance could not in, the patient could not get out. This is about government that has become micro-government survival. And I think it's been brought out very well by the office of Madam Duarte about the crisis that we're facing. How do we handle the need, the burgeoning of civil society that every African country, from Congo to Ethiopia to Gambia, every street is littered with a non-profit organization seeking to do what the state should be doing. And eventually, it's not surprising that many of them will morph into those extremist groups, because while the state is losing legitimate power, other groups are gaining that legitimate power and illegitimate power over the people. Professor Mutunga, do you want to say something about this? If he's still...
Yeah, I'm still here. The issue of civil society that you mentioned, of course, you know, we have to ask ourselves what is, this civil society, and I think that is important if we are going to argue that it's facing the state or it's aiding the state, because civil society, in terms of the elements of it, there's what is called secular, civil society. And in this, you have social movements, you have human rights movements, you have the intellectuals, and women's groups, and you also have the religious sector, which is the theological class, if you want to call it that, which is also very important. But all these groups, you see, are not independent, of the ruling groups in these particular countries. There are some that play a critical role in agitating for an alternative political leadership. The others that are satisfied with the status quo. And so in totality, some of them, it's true, they might mitigate, the failures of the state. A lot of churches in Kenya have hospitals, they have private schools, they have private universities. In a country where the majority of us want free education from kindergarten to the university. A lot of us who are agitating for universal health care, clean water, security, food, etc. So this civil society has to be unpackaged, in my view, because it's not homogeneous and it doesn't have the same political position in most countries, and even the funding that goes on in my view, it does fund resistance to the status quo, while at the same time it also supports, the status quo, and that's an area that has to be discussed. If of course we're looking at an Africa that will be an Africa that serves the needs of Africans, and what the challenges are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ms. Kumeh, Professor Kumeh, you wanted to say a word on this?
Yeah. There's civil society, there's uncivil society as well. And, the civil society, well, I edited this book, maybe 15 years ago. So even the normative sort of civil society, the women's associations, the alumni, the churches that do good works, they also exhibit this dual role of eroding state power. And I think the funding from the 1980s, when the United States and its allies decided to stop putting their money in development assistance, because official ODA, they said that the African state was incompetent and that civil society was a third sector. And so they made this decision, and you can see that from the 1980s to the 2000s, there was a halving. This is before the current cuts now. It was deliberate, it was written down, the World Bank was a key part of it. And then, what amazes me is that things will then break as a response, and then these same people will come and start talking about, oh, it's broken. We have to help the Africans. So I wonder why we are lab rats in their, experiments. Now, it shocked me. The first time I read Stiglitz's book, Globalization and its Discontents, and he was talking about the ways in which he saw the World Bank having messed up. He was the CEO of the World Bank, and he said this. I was, taken aback. I said, so these people realize that they're damaging people's lives. Then there was that first female head of the IMF. She apologized that they gave bad advice. But what I want to know is what is wrong with us? Why is it that we take this advice at face value and we don't push back? Well, the conditionalities, we are in debt, we need to reschedule, but I do think if we get together, all the debtors, the creditors can't win this. But we can't get together because they do bribes, side payments that divide the whole unity effort. You need to go back to the 1980s with the threatened default of the Latin American big debtors to see what the situation was and how Fidel Castro was one of the people talking about, let's form a debtors cartel and face these people instead of them facing us one by one. That's a solution, but it's not going to happen because we won't be united. If we unite, we can negotiate better deals. Actually, I think many of these debts should be canceled because they've been paid and, now I'm digressing. On civil society, I'll give the example, please indulge me, of my sister's neighborhood. They hired the OPC. OPC, an ethnic militia, a Yoruba ethnic militia, because they were tired of armed robbers. And the OPC guy came, he had his gun. They had streets. Public streets are gated in Lagos, Nigeria, so that if you come at a certain time, you cannot go in, and if you want to go out, you can't. So this guy was guarding, and he was very good at his job. Everybody was happy. Until the day he shot the chairman of the neighborhood association because he dared to want to come in and was arguing with this guy and say, I'm the chairman of the neighborhood association. So I'm saying this to say self-help is what we always say is good. You know, the state is not there. Let's settle our own business. It's dangerous, and it is actually an indicator that there's no state. That, you know, these self-help efforts have taken over, and if it's self-help, I can do what I want. I'm not accountable to anybody, you know, and it weakens the state. The state even sometimes hires some of these people in Nigeria to be the security guard of the governor, to guard the pipelines for oil and so forth. And they pay them, you know, you cannot even imagine. So it's a very complex thing. And this celebration of civil society, I think we have to corral ourselves and realize that if you are privatizing what should be public, whether it's responsibility or service provision, there are going to be, you know, fallouts that you cannot control, and it messes things up more. It's also in the US because there are private jails. There are immigration jails that are run by corporations for profit, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Okome. I know you're feeling tortured by me right now on the side, so we have so much to discuss. We are going to move into our interactive session now. But as we go into it, as you were speaking, what hit me was that we are truly only laying the stage for our conversations today. The only thing that is keeping me feeling really encouraged at the moment is that tomorrow we have a chance to begin to talk about pathways. Because some of the things that you just mentioned, the class, the capacity of the political elite to utilize the absence of the state as a way of constructing alternatives is leading to a level of misery and pain that we know is unprecedented. That comes out over and over again in all the statements. If we lose sight of that, we've lost sight of everything. We're not just dealing with the data, we're dealing with lives that are being lost every day, abductions, the growth of militia across the entire continent. We are dealing with the fact that people are waking up unable to envisage what it means to survive the day. They know there is no state that knows them. They are not on a list for social welfare. There's no guarantee that they will have health care. We are running the African state. If you have any connection with part of the African homeland, you know part of your income is running the African state at the moment. And that is what we have to change. So I want to thank you all very much for your interventions up to this moment, and to call on our Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Barlow, to first move us forward with a guide into this interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have actually less than an hour to go. So just pep up your energies. Very soon, Dr. Kweyi Soyinka Ariwele will be inviting a couple of speakers from the UN system to respond. Please, during the course of these discussions, maybe some things were not clear. Maybe you had a eureka moment and you have an idea that can solve Africa's problem by tomorrow. And we can have a borderless Africa. Maybe you have an experience. If you have those, please, I've been directed to ask you to either raise your hand and they will take note so that they will come to you to give a point. Member states who also wish to make a comment, please feel free either to press. When you raise your hand, they will take note and come to you. And also if you press your talk button, they will try and come to you so that we do this next hour in an orderly way after our excellent moderator introduces two more people from the UN system. And then right after that, we'll spend 30 to 45 minutes, all of us together, finding solutions to Africa's challenges. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. It's very rare for us as scholars and practitioners to have the chance to really be in dialogue with representatives of United Nations organizations and agencies. So this is a very special moment to listen. I first want to call on the ASG, representative of the ASG for peace building, to respond with some of the thoughts. Thank you. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Professor. Rosalind Akombe. I'm representing both the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, and also the Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding, Ms. Elizabeth Speha. Both would have really loved to be here today, but they're unable to due to other engagements, very last minute, especially for my direct boss, Assistant Secretary General Speha. It was a very rich conversation that I'm not sure I'm clear what my response would be, especially when you have very prominent professors that I have spoken, people that I have looked up to in my scholarly work and also in my work at the United Nations. All of them really great. We enjoy Professor Farah's books and work of art. It was really great hearing Professor Gebremariam. I call Ethiopia my second home, having worked there both for our mother institution, the African Union, and for the United Nations Development Bank, but also to a development program, UNDP, but also to hear from you, Prof, and Professor Ukome, whose name is so close to Akombe that I was almost going to take her name for mine, and really great to have heard from our Undersecretary General, who always inspires us, Duarte, especially the points that she made around sovereignty. And of course, the Honorable former Chief Justice of Kenya, whom we all look up to for his work that he's done over the years, Dr. William Tunga. Many of us are his students, both in civil society, but also the work that he's done. So just first wanted to do my protocols. I cannot avoid that. Otherwise, I will not be a UN bureaucrat. Maybe just to structure the response, maybe around 4 points. I know that we have very limited time. Maybe to start off with, for us, obviously, as United Nations staff, we are obligated to support the state. That is really what our job is to provide the capacities that the state requires. And I work in an office that takes very seriously the issues around national ownership, in which none of our activities that we do from the Peacebuilding Fund or support to the Peacebuilding Commission, none of it can we do without national ownership and without the consent of our nation state. So for us, that is something that is fundamental. And this was also reinforced by the Secretary General when he presented his new agenda for peace last year, in which actually he sought for a paradigm shift in the way in which we work on prevention and peace building, underscoring all the things that you said today about colonialism, coloniality, neo-colonialism, really stressing that universality, the universality of prevention, that there are no member states that come from one part of the world that can be able to prevent conflicts in another one, and that all member states are, have to take the universality of prevention and peace building, which is really what the new agenda for peace was when the Secretary General presented it, which was also endorsed in the Pact for the Future. So that's one important point that we wanted to stress from the Peace Building Support Office and the Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, the importance of sovereignty and really national ownership. It's really up to the member states then to decide. Do they want to have a predator state, as we see in some of the African countries? Do we want to see a developmental state? What kind of state are we talking about? And so whichever one that the member states decide on, then our role is really to support the initiatives around that. The second point that we wanted to really talk about, and I think when we had a lot around the eroding of the state capacity, a weak state, a strong state, and just a question that we hear from a lot of the young people, because part of the work that we do in the Peace Building Support Office is really on youth, peace, and security. And we've been having consultations the whole of this year in readiness for a report, an independent study that the Secretary General was requested to do on youth, peace, and security. And what we hear from the young people of Africa is, do we really want a strong state that kills us? Do we really want a state where when we go out to raise the concerns on accountability and governance that kills us? Is that the kind of state we are talking about? Those are the questions we hear when we are talking to them about the state and how they see governance in general. So as you postulate and discuss about the state, and whether the state should be strengthened and whether civil society is weakening the state, these are the questions the young people of Africa are asking. When they started the Tonela Purge a few years ago, those are the questions they were asking about. What kind of state are you asking us to then be supporting? Then the last from us, again, I really want to go back to the issue of the civil society and just to explain that for us, CSOs are different. They are not the same. They are not all have the same motivations for being created and for the work that they do. That is why for us in the Peace Building Support Office, we do have a CSO-UN dialogue every year that brings together civil society organizations that are working on peace building and sustaining peace to really discuss some of these issues on governance, on institutions, and how to strengthen them. I leave with a plea. We're told all the time that every generation decides on what path they want to really lead this continent of ours, beautiful continent of ours. The Mamdanis of this world, the Kwame Nkrumahs of this world had the courage to stand up and fight, colonialism to the level in which they could do. What are we going to do, this generation of ours? Are we going to analyze and say that we have bad governance and stop there? Are we going to stop at analysis paralysis, as Dr. William Tunga likes saying, or are we going to take up our responsibility of fixing the problems that we have and really come up with a state that, as Professor Gebremariam said, that is not based on the existing frameworks? Are we willing and ready to make the sacrifices that are required to transition the state as we currently see it to this kind of state that we had our Undersecretary General talk about this morning? I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, particularly also for bringing some of the voices of the young people with whom you've spoken, who are wondering, what does it mean? What is the vision of the state? And what would it look like for the UN to work with that vision without becoming the alternative source of authority and legitimacy? It's almost like a tight rope that you are navigating, where it means that the UN is present, but without in itself eroding, again, furthermore, the capacity of states to deliver. I really appreciate that. I would also like to call on Mr. Alexandre Zoué, I hope I pronounced that right, who is the ASG for counter-terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I am Mr. Mauro Miedico. I am the director of the UN Counterterrorism Center, acting under Secretary General, is traveling in Africa for a very important conference on victims, on African victims of terrorism. So I am the officer in charge today, and I wish to particularly thank Under Secretary General Duarte, querida Cristina, for inviting our office. A few points on the discussion, which is very enriching. The first, from our perspective, if we have to look at the state of the state, the most concerning threat comes from the unprecedented penetration of terrorist groups into the African continent, particularly, as we know well, in Sahel and in Somalia or in the Horn of Africa. Daesh, Al-Qaeda are enlarging their presences, they are penetrating. We have ISGS, we have ISWAP expanding to the coastal region. They are attempting even to penetrate it in the northern part of Nigeria, where we also have Boko Haram. We have Daesh, we have Al-Qaeda affiliates, Janim, and there the blockade on fuel imports and any other supply in Bamako is just an example how they are weaponizing economies to really coerce population and terrorize. We have an unprecedented recruitment of young people, children aged 8, 9 years old. We have also an increase in the flows of foreign terrorist fighters. We have half of Daesh affiliates in Somalia are foreigners, and we have Al-Shabaab that has probably reached unprecedented level up to 18,000 combatants. This is really something that is for us probably the first and most relevant threat to the state in Africa. 4 points for possible consideration in this room. First, we need to understand better the threat, which is very different and localized. Africa is a very big continent. We do need to engage more with academic institutions. We need our responses to be evidence-based driven, and so this type of events between policy and academic institution are extremely important. Second point, it's about the weakness of the collaboration and the fragmented arrangements, including with regional organizations. We still see this as a strong impediment to sharing of information and to collective action. Of course, we have taken with much, we have welcomed very much the latest resolution adopted on 15th of August on the cooperation between the UN and the African Union. There is also a strong reference to, of course, the Security Council resolution 2719, but we are still lacking the elements of the sustainable financing of AU-led peace support operations. We also are very glad that the African Union has taken strong steps to establish now, and they adopted the terms of reference for the establishment of a subcommittee on counterterrorism within the African Union Peace and Security Council. This is another very important step. And this is because, as it has been mentioned, African-owned and African-led solutions to security are essential. Your leadership, our support. This is really what is of strong importance to us. But there are a number of also sub-regional initiatives that could be strengthened. The Accra initiative is challenging now, and we need to continue our strong support to it. Of course, ECOWAS, SADC, IGAD have strong counterterrorism areas of work that need collective response. The third point is about reinforcing local capacities, particularly also from the security point of view. We have started working in a different manner in our office. We engaged with African governments. We have created African offices in Rabat, in particular, in Kenya, and we are strongly working under the leadership of national institutions for the region. And this is also in partnership with academic institutions. As an example, we have established a very relevant training center on counterterrorism in Rabat, And we partner with institutions. We have transformed our way of doing business at the UN just with workshop or dedicated small lines of capacity building into long-term programs that are validated by university that offer masters for free, of course, to law enforcement security officers. That's a complete shift because that's a way also to incorporate our training into national institutions. But the last point I want to raise is probably the most important. If we want to be effective, we need collectively to overcome the dichotomy that is still strong present, both at government side and especially at the UN, that security is a matter only of security institutions. It is not. Development and security go hand in hand, and we should avoid this compartmentalization, again, very strongly, unfortunately, within the UN, enlarging our efforts, working much more, as it has been said, with communities, with civil society, with the youth. We have launched a very relevant program last year on youth empowerment and engagement on counterterrorism. And I love the sentence of one of the youth people. We have worked in Nigeria, in Kenya, and in Somalia, this one being particularly from Kenya, telling me we should not be on the menu to be eaten at the table. We should be in the kitchen cooking with policy institutions. We have a great opportunity to address all these points because next summer in June, the UN will go after 3 years into the review of the UN counterterrorism strategy. It will be the 20th anniversary after its adoption in 2006, and African member states can really play a leadership role in injecting a lot of these elements and your vision into counterterrorism policy at the UN. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, not just for what you shared, but for the work that is being done. And, you know, when you spoke about the need for that greater partnership, it was very informative. And I was struck by the fact that if you probably interviewed college students across the United States and probably Europe, maybe 1% or 0.5 might have ever heard that the UN has a counterterrorism unit at all. You know, so it's amazing. One of the things we're talking about is perception. And the gap between the perception of the work of the UN and its reality is really profound, not just among the general public, but certainly in academia as well. And I think combating that is going to be one of the most critical, I think, aspects of the work that we all have to do, is profound levels of ignorance. And at the same time, with the changing times, it might be that the UN is going to be one of the only people's organizations that will exist to fight for justice and rights. So if we don't transform our understanding of that work, then a lot will be lost. So thank you again, both for the work and for the word you've said. We are going to call now on, thank you all very much for your patience. We're going to call members of distinguished audience here and participants to share. This is the housekeeping rule. Please keep it very brief, okay? It's not the epistle, it's not the sermon, it's not the time for that amazing book you're writing. Take a minute or two. There'll be an opportunity for conversations afterwards. And I'm just going to call on this initial list of respondents, comments, thoughts, epiphanies, and questions. All right. We're going to start with the representative of Nigeria. Speaking. Thank you. Recognizing you now.
Thank you very much, dear Professor. And first of all, my deep appreciation to the OSCE and all the speakers and professors who gave remarks here today. We're very honored to be part of this important discussion. Just quickly at the start, I would just want to quickly provide some context to Professor Farah's remarks on the educational system in Nigeria. As some other people mentioned, it's important that states in Africa utilize evidence-based approaches to solving problems. So in 2022, Nigeria instituted a policy of instruction in schools for indigenous languages. But one problem that was noticed since then was that there was an increased failure rate, and that may be traced to the fact that Nigeria has over 500 languages. People like me, the language I speak, my indigenous language, you cannot find teachers for my language. It's extremely difficult because we're a very small ethnic group and small language group. So the challenge was, how do you instruct kids who come from different languages and in one class? How do you instruct them in one particular indigenous language? That created its own issues. So the language of instruction which Nigeria uses now, which we reverted back to, is English. Of course, indigenous languages are also being taught in schools, and they are spoken widely in society. So it's not like it's a repudiation of indigenous languages. I think the policy was put in place initially to, in response to studies which said people learn better in indigenous languages. But it's important that all these studies and policies are taken into particular local contexts. And the context in Nigeria, as we have seen from experience since it was introduced in 2022, showed that it wasn't a very proper thing to do because of the duplicity of languages in the country. I think it's been said that tomorrow there will be time for solutions, so I'll keep those aside until tomorrow, but just make general comments on what some of the other speakers have said. So Africa, some of the problems which we have, I agree with the international system, the way the international economic system especially is structured, even the international, the UNSC too, where Africa has no representative among the P5, and the international economic system especially, which hampers Africa's development. So at the committee which I follow at the UN, the second committee, it's part of what we do. We try as much as possible, as much as we can, at different opportunities to try to get a fairer economic order. What can African academics do? What can African diaspora, especially in these parts, do? I think they can help to amplify that message to especially power blocks in some of these countries, to parliaments, to executive arms of governments, to see how to make them understand that Africa's development is not a threat to any other country's own position. And we must realize that humanity as a whole develops together when everyone develops, and not some are dead poor while others are rich and full of surpluses. So some of these policies that people have mentioned that tend to keep African countries down, our diaspora and academics and the academia here can help to pass our message and pass these things that we push at the UN in important power centers in these countries. So I will leave some of the other things that I've noted when we go into solutions tomorrow. There are quite a few, and I hope we'll have more time than the 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you to briefly just mention your name?
My name is Otaigbe Irusota.
Thank you so much.
I hope you can pronounce it. Thank you.
Thank you. I know our panelists are probably itching to respond, but they're not going to be allowed to respond yet until we take a few more comments and questions from the floor. So thank you so much, sir. When your number is called, please raise your hand so that the amazing mic tech folks can put on your mic. And please mention your name as you speak. So I'm going to call on 406. Thank you. His hand is over there.
Thank you. My name is Mike Martinez, and I'm a member of the UN Research Institute for Social Development Eco-Social Contract Network. And like Professor Okombe, I'm also from Brooklyn College. There we go. Stating the obvious, we know that mining and forestry operations could impact water quality. Water can even be displaced from different communities for industry and commercial use. But the risks of harvesting natural resources for markets are not well communicated in home languages, offering no contingency, as community development agreements and other kinds of contracts and agendas tend to be in European languages. So what mechanisms do you propose to prevent communities from being left in the dark? And what do we know about the state apparatus successfully applying best practices from civil society observations and work? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent questions. I know they're taking note right now. Number 381.
Thank you so much. My name is Fortune Chigozie Ogolere. I'm a Nigerian writer and MFA student here in New York. So I believe a nation's artistic, expression is the clearest representation of its interior. So in this light, my question is this: how can African states create or preserve strong structures for storytelling and the arts, especially when capitalist and social pressures back home often make artistic work feel undervalued? And what practical models do you believe can help protect or elevate our narrative traditions, as part of nation building? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, another very powerful question that goes to the heart of somewhat what Professor Farah said. I'm going to call on 447. 447? Okay, over there. Yes. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yassin Fathali. I represent Jussur Youth Organizations. We are part of civil society in Middle East and North African area. So because tomorrow there is the lack of solutions, so I like to give more recommendations and solutions for tomorrow, but I want to ask questions about the representative of the UN or the missions, or even when we talk about our area, how we can create more mechanism for the civil society to work with the governments, but for the planning to the evaluations, not just to be part of this kind of works, but we want to show our initiatives of our project and the fact we can collaborate with the governments and thanks. Yes,
Thank you very much. If I understand, you were directing that at some of the UN agencies to see how, okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Calling on 351.
My name is Wend Manekde Petropa. I am a student at New York University, an undergraduate student. I'm from Burkina Faso. And my question is regarding, it's more of a comment, but it's also regarding seizing the moment and what that means. I think that I am going to graduate soon, and I'm kind of thinking about, okay, what do I want to do with my life, which is to have an impact on the African continent, to change the African continent. But where do I go, and where is it most critical for me to be? I'm an international relations major, so I study mostly politics. And for me, I see a lot of African scholars here in the United States, and they're my professors, and they're you guys, and I come here and I listen to you guys, and I'm inspired by you. And for me, it's I wonder if the scholars that I'm looking up to, if they can be my presidents, if you guys can be presidents, and if I want to study and be a scholar, if I'm a scholar of international relations, would a good avenue, or would a possible avenue for me to be a scholar first and then into African politics? Is that possible? Is that an outlet that happens? And why do you guys decide not to do it? Or and yeah.
What can I say? I love your question. And I'm ready to run your campaign, all right? So, that's a deep and a huge question, a big challenge to everyone. Thank you again for that question. I think it goes to the heart of many of our students. I wouldn't say much more, but I know that there's a sense of not just anxiety, but a lot of frustration. What is the pathway, knowing these things, and where do I go in order to make an impact? And so thank you for, asking that. I'm going to take, yes.
This sister from Burkina Faso, I'm from south of your nation. I want to make 2 quick points, one positive and one challenging. Professor PLO Lumumba in Kenya, he's someone who speaks, and many of us want to digest what he's saying. But I think he said he contested and he couldn't even get his family members to vote for him. If you are a certain mindset, when you go back and your own cousin doesn't receive maybe $1 or $2 from you, they would take it from somebody else and vote for, even though you are the best person. But there is hope, because from here in the United States, from Lincoln University, 2 Africans, one called Nnamdi Azikiwe, became first president of Nigeria, encouraged another younger brother from what became Ghana called Kwame Nkrumah. So when we talk about the brain drain, I am offering some hope. There are Nigerians, Ghanaians here. Nnamdi Azikiwe left the United States, set up a newspaper in Accra, Ghana. Eventually went to Nigeria and helped Nigeria become independent. He encouraged and supported probably the greatest Pan-African who wanted all of Africa to unite, Kwame Nkrumah. They were here. Kwame Nkrumah apparently was selling fish in Harlem before they went back. So there are many of us in this room. If we need inspiration, there will be more than inspiration for us to take from here, to take back, and turn the brain drain into brain gain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call on a couple of representatives of member states now for their quick comments. Again, we'll keep it brief and we'll keep it moving. At 1 p.m., actually, our interpreters will be decamping. They will be leaving, all right? They'll be absent, let's put it that way. So we want to make sure we hit that note. All right. I'm calling on 366, the representative from Cape Verde.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairperson, moderator, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to keep it really quick. So I wanted to start to congratulate USG Cristina Duarte from my country, Cabo Verde. We are very proud of her. But I wanted to congratulate her and her team for this very good initiative of bringing together so many people, young, vibrant people, to reflect on Africa and involving, in particular, the academia. We do this kind of exercise from time to time at the UN. We do it at the African Union. We do it in special partnership meetings like the recent summit, African Union, European Union. But we need to involve more the civil society, women, youth, and academia. Not only in Africa and from Africa, but also our diasporas, because they are very rich. And you can tell by the composition of this room that the initiative was really very positive. When I look at the turnout, maybe I regret not seeing more permanent representatives, especially from other regional groups, because I think it's important, of course, among ourselves, but also with the others. They should listen more to us, and being here would be an excellent opportunity for that. I do know that, of course, this is a very hectic time at the UN. The 6 committees are at full speed. There are many other meetings happening, so maybe that's one of the reasons for not having more colleagues in this room. The energy is very good. The ideas are excellent, so I keep it here, and I look forward to the outcome of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with the reminder also that it's vitally important that these conversations should also be heard, you know. So we're not just speaking, but it must be heard by those who also need to understand the context of the issues that have been raised. So thank you for that. And I will call on 370, the representative from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And I also wish to thank USG Duarte for organizing this. The presentations were excellent. There is nothing more I can say about them. there is so much understanding, so much methodic understanding and explanation. And I'm so proud to have a compatriot at the podium with that kind of competence. The only thing that I wanted, I am taking the floor, is one, we need to, here at the UN, we are so busy talking about Agenda 2030, the SDGs. They are faltering very badly. And the impact on the SDGs could have on our continent is, I think, too big. So how can we link what we talk in terms of the understanding here, in practical terms? How can we apply them, or how can we explain some of the problems in the context of what we are talking today? The same way the Agenda 2063 is our continental agenda. It also needs better understanding. That's what's happening on the ground. What we have as a continent on the ground. What's going wrong, and how should we get it right on the implementation side? So some degree of linking these things, like the debt issue, is a big agenda at the UN here. We talk about it day in, day out. How can this kind of discourse help us pin down on our approach to it? Of course, the peace and security dimension, the Peace Building Commission has given us some idea, their perspective. The counterterrorism people gave us some perspective. I didn't hear the economic dimension being brought out at the UN level here. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow, but that's important item that we shouldn't be left out somehow. I thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, sir. And I know your wish will be met tomorrow, because tomorrow we're certainly going to be focusing on the economic issues, the economic questions. And I also appreciate the point you made about the growing divergence almost between the conversations that are happening here, the agendas that are being set, and also where the discourses are elsewhere. And how do we kind of reconnect those kind of conversations to ensure that they are centered in the realities on ground. So thank you very much. We're going to go at speed right now. I'll be calling on number 458. If you could wave your hand. 458. Over there. Thank you. We'll give 1 minute.
Greetings. My name is Cheryl Murray Powell, Esquire, and I'm the international president of the Ethiopian World Federation, Incorporated, which was founded by Royal Imperial Charter by His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I. I also represent the global Rastafari community. We have repatriates to Africa going back decades and multiple generations. Some of our repatriates have welcomed their children and grandchildren on the continent. I have solutions that I'll share tomorrow, but today I'll ask the questions with regards to the confidence of our repatriates to the continent with regards to some of the civil rights issues that we've encountered. Overall, repatriating has been a pleasant experience. We are committed to the development of Africa based on our constitution and bylaws. Some of the issues we've encountered includes a recent incident with one of our settlers to Gambia who's purchased land, he's developed, he has grandchildren there, was incarcerated for remnants of a ganja spliff. And his hair, which is his royal crown, was cut in the Gambia. This is devastating for us because we're so invested in developing on the African continent along with our brothers and sisters based there. In addition, we have settlers in Shashamane, which was given to us by a land grant by His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I. And some of our settlers are concerned about recent litigation where they have to protect their land against a taking. What we're asking is, how do we work with local governments? How do we ensure that these historic documents of our land grants that have been issued are honored so that we can have the confidence to bring resources, funding, intellectual property to the African continent that we love so much, that we are bound by our Constitution and bylaws to support without fear of these types of civil rights violations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad that the representative is here to respond later. Thank you. We will take four. Have I called 498? No, 498. We'll do 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to appreciate our moderator and the organizers of this conference. This is my very first time of attending this conference. And my name is Dr. Ngozi Omojunikombi, and I'm from the University of Port Harcourt in Nigeria. And I'm also the chairman of Comfort Akioma Ngozi Ago Foundation, an NGO. So my question has to do with the security in Nigeria. Nigeria is going through a lot of insecurity cases right now. And when one of our dear Professor Okome was talking, she mentioned that it's high time we begin to help ourselves. And knowing what is going on, the level of genocide that is happening in the country, I want to know and ask the way we can help ourselves, whereby you have people who are well equipped, the level of guns and instruments they have, even the Nigerian army per se, might not have up to that. Recently, a general was killed in the field. So many generals, so many individuals are killed. We have Boko Haram we are dealing with. We have farmers' headers crisis, whereby even farmers can no longer be free to work in their farms. While working in the farms, they are attacked. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how we can help ourselves. And I really appreciate it, because whatever solution we receive, I'm going to take it back home, because this is really a big problem that is almost tearing the country apart. Yes. And that is why we have to cry out to the United States president to come to our rescue, because we don't have the wherewithal to fight these people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I know they've taken it all. And I recognize the passion, the anguish with which you're speaking. So thank you for that. 464. Again, 1 minute. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nele, and I am a student at Harvard University. I am a member of African Women Leaders Networking, and I'm from also Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire for French people. We know that Africa has many challenges. So my question is, how can African states strengthen their legitimacy and effectiveness while adapting to rapid social, economic, and technological transformation in a changing world? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that question. Legitimacy in a changing world. 426. 426. Okay. We will move on if no one is here for 426. 383. Thank you.
Hi, thank you to the panelists for your intellectual generosity. Can you guys hear me? My name is Jadel Onibe Peterson, and I'm a PhD candidate at Stony Brook University studying Nigerian history. I'll keep my question brief, but my question is for the panelists. What happens and what are your thoughts on when the state responds to its citizens asking for change with violence, as we're talking about the role of the African states, the absence of the states, and I think about the Niger Delta crisis, I think about NSARS, and I'm concerned with how young people should feel about belonging to a state that responds to them with armed violence when they're requesting accountability. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Biora, can I call you once I take these next two, and then I call on you? Thank you so much. It's a deep question there. 447. 447. Any hand up? No, I will move on then to 361.
Hi, my name is Awa Saidi. I am the Associate Director for the African Studies Initiative at the University of Minnesota. I am also the Executive Director for Global Africa, which is a subsidiary of the World Congress, World Comparative Education Society. Recently, I did an institute on artificial intelligence and educational innovation in Africa. And I know the Undersecretary Duarte did say, talk about sovereignty, digital sovereignty, and I think sovereignty is probably the word of the day here, especially in terms of epistemological sovereignty. What I want to know from your thought, as thought leaders, what is your take on artificial intelligence and educational innovation in the African context? What we know is the localization and the contextualization of artificial intelligence is problematic for Africa because the algorithms are not created by us. And it's a force to be reckoned with. And I know Professor Nuruddin Farah also mentioned about innovation and how to support young people. But I think this is an issue that we need to deal with. We cannot stay silent about it. It's a force to be reckoned with. Thank you.
Thank you so much. AI, large question. Before I know I have 4 other folks who wanted to speak, I'm going to, however, take Dr. Biora first. I'm going to call on our panelists with very short responses. You will have 2 minutes each to do your brief responses. And I do apologize if we're unable to get to those last 4 hands. Professor Biora. That's what I was calling you right now.
My 45 seconds to a keynote speaker, because my question is fundamentally addressed to you, sir. It will be a missed opportunity for me in this room not to engage you after the incredibly masterfully cooked soup that you served us. So the bottom line for me, or as I was licking my finger and I got to the bottom part, it was really about Africa's agency, which host had represented in terms of Africa's sovereignty. You know, I don't blame the Nigerian who is going to Canada. And I don't expect Canada to not poach Nigeria's talents if Nigeria is not doing much about it, right? But that's Nigeria's investment, as you talked about, exiting, and Canada is complicit in that as well. How do we invigorate our agency, the agency of the so-called Westphalian state that we inherited, that we've not done much with? The fundamentals for that state, we have pretty much not really thought through what it should be. I've always talked about how Africa had, at least Nigeria, we had very vibrant societies that the British deemed fit to predicate their hegemony on because they had the indirect policy of colonialism or whatever, administrative colonial administration. When they left us with the lemon called the Westphalian state. And we've been trying to play catch up. The fundamentals for that are not even with us. Sir, after all this, as an octogenarian, having just taken the back seat and observed all of this so well, please talk to me. How could we do more in terms of trying to reinvigorate our agency as a people?
Thank you very much. Prof, would you like to respond briefly? Yes.
Where do I press?
You're good now.
It's good.
Once it comes on red, just leave that.
Let's try.
There we go. You're set. You're set. Just go ahead and talk, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, the greatest problem I find nearly everywhere, I've lived in about 6, 7 different African countries. I've been thrown out of 3 of them. A very good average. only three. And one of the reasons why I was thrown out of the Gambia, I can tell you now, is I was once interviewed I was publishing a book, the BBC interviewed me, because at that time I was living in the Gambia. And they said, a very simple killer question: how do you find Gambia? What do you think about Gambia? And then I said, stupidly, that the president of the Gambia spends more time playing golf in Scotland than running his country. So when I arrived back in Senegal, Dakar, on my way back to the Gambia, somebody came, knocked on my door in the middle of the night. I woke up in my pajamas, and this man introduced himself to me and said, Mr. Farah, if you come to the Gambia, we will lock you up in Mile 2, which is the biggest prison in the Gambia. Small country, big prison. So you can imagine what happens. People cannot speak. There is no freedom of speech, no freedom of thought, no freedom of any sort. The other problem that I discover is that when the head of state is described by nearly everybody as being a thief, stealing money, ordinary people's money, there is nothing you can do about the rest of the country. So we have reached a stage where nothing can be done until we organize ourselves in such a way that we can't be beaten back. And that is going to be very, very difficult because the weaknesses are organizational. The weaknesses are we do not have associations of academics, we don't have association of writers, we don't have we have to build associations and groups of people so that we can move together. And if Nuruddin is arrested, somebody else comes out and says, you know, this cannot continue. That is, I think, one of the ways we can fight back, because it's a time to fight back. We have already lost nearly everything of the continent to, you know, people stealing, grabbing, doing everything. And Europe and America are not the only ones who have taken away earth minerals. If there were locals who were protecting, doing the job that they should do, we wouldn't have this kind of problem. And then education. Young people in the Sudan in the 50s, then in the 60s, then in the 80s, overthrew governments by coming into the streets and doing all that. But young people were beaten so hard over the years that they left the country to ruin, because now see what's happening to the Sudan. So I think we need to think back and say, what are our responsibilities as people, as Africans, and then organize ourselves into communities that can fight back. And that's my only suggestion, and thank you very much.
Much, sir. Thank you, sir. It is 1:01, and I want to do two things. One is to thank very much our interpreters who've had to leave at 1 p.m. Can we give them a round of applause and appreciation? And secondly, to crave your indulgence for an additional 10 minutes of your time. I'm very sure the UN will have a massive lunch somewhere floating around in cyberspace for us to eat. But just to have very quick responses, 2 minutes each from our panelists. I'll start with Professor Eyob Gebremire.
Okay, I'll be brief. several questions, but I would like to bring them together into three. The first one on the issue of civil society. I think we should also expand it into to the think tanks, to the research centers that operate within the continent that have somehow congested the epistemic space so that even shaping the way in which the African state is not able to respond to questions and design policies that are relevant to the population, but rather driven by external actors. I think that's a very important issue to understand. The other aspect is on the language issue. With all due respect, my brother, I disagree significantly. I just want to quote my fellow panelist and say there is no shortcut to emancipation. Language is not just simply a medium of communication. Language is a repository of our knowledge systems, and we cannot put administrative, technical, and budget-focused problems as an excuse not to recognize mother tongue language education system. Because that is so we no longer need the colonialists to come and punish us to embrace its language, because that's what's happened across the world. Now we are doing it for ourselves. So I substantively disagree with any education system that disregards local language as a medium of education, and which is also related to what my brother mentioned earlier about the storytelling and art. By endorsing and reaffirming what Madame Duarte was talking about, epistemic dignity, epistemic sovereignty can be one way of ensuring that is by recognizing, valorizing the richness of our language, the new interpretation, the new world view that we can generate without the encumbrance and the burden of Eurocentric knowledge systems. Finally, to the person who responded from the UN Counterterrorism Office, I think it's also equally important to understand that Africa is also a battleground, a geopolitical and geo-economic battleground. It's not only terrorist groups that are engulfing and mushrooming, running around across the continent. It is also other countries, from the Gulf countries, from Europe, Asia, the US. It's not only former colonies. We have lots of new emerging countries that have military bases across the continent. They are not there just simply to play fun. They still consider the continent as a battleground to ensure their dominance. Our Zimbabwean historian, Sabelo Mfolo-Gatseni, talks about the commercial, non-territorial military empire. That empire is the one that is determining, shaping, and controlling the distribution and production of critical resources, trade routes, and everything. Yes, the terrorist groups are there, but also countries are destabilizing as we speak. We are seeing what's happening in Sudan. We have countries, their military bases sitting next to each other in the Horn of Africa region. I'm from Ethiopia. I know how volatile that region is. It's not only these terrorist groups, but also countries across the world who are taking advantage of the continent. So I think we should broaden that and see that's also part of the problem, in addition to your particular focus on the terrorist groups. Just out of respect, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Professor Okome, 2 minutes.
Well, education is as important as all those kinetic measures of national security. But I'm yet to see an African country that takes that as seriously as it needs to. Now, not going to school, but education for what? You know, and what is it that we want for our continent? Is the education that we are giving enabling us to decolonize our minds? Because I think we still have a serious problem. Also about security and insecurity, I just wonder about our naivety. And I have asked my Nigerian compatriots, with whom I'm very sympathetic, nobody should be this insecure. But how is America the solution? You know, check Libya, check Syria, check Afghanistan, check Iraq, check the Latin American neighbors of the US that they have helped, and tell me that those places are better off now than before they called America in. So we also tend to think there's free lunch. They're just going to give you something, and they don't want anything in return. And when I say to Nigerians that we have rare earth minerals that the US wants, and the Chinese are now controlling it, they want to snatch it away from them, they say, what does America need from us? It needs the rare earth minerals. And it has said so in its national security documents. And even President Trump has spoken about, you know, look at what he's getting out of Ukraine. So please, nobody is going to come and help us to solve our problems. We have to find ways of talking among ourselves and solving our problems. It's possible. But we have given up on that, and we're running helter-skelter, looking for people to come and save us. They will come, and we're going to regret it. It's not like I'm a soothsayer, but look at history and look at contemporary developments in the world, and let us stop being naive. Now, I think young people have to be included. You know, anybody that knows me, I've talked about NSAS, I'm campaigning about Bring Back Our Girls. I'm very, very interested in security being experienced in Nigeria, and I've lived actually in the Middle Belt. For 1 year, I went and spent my sabbatical there. Many Nigerians won't even go. And I intend to go retire in Nigeria. So I'm not just talking from here. I have really never left, either in my mind or in my body. I go to Nigeria several times a year. So I know how it is. All my sisters and my huge extended family there in Nigeria. So listen, if we think that we're going to outsource this, it will come back and bite us. And I hope that I won't be right, that maybe the Western countries have become angelic. Now, the small arms that are used in many of these wars are also produced in the West and sold by all these defense companies, multinationals. You know, even landmines that should be banned are sold by some of these people. We want to trust them. It's okay. Now, I want us to reject orthodoxy. The world system we're in is not favorable to us. If we don't unite among ourselves, we're going to be perpetually marginalized, oppressed, and traumatized, and complaining, and there'll be no solution. I also think that, so we need a different kind of state. The powerless people have to unite. I agree with Professor Farah. We have to, you know, it has to be a grounds-up thing. And, you know, I see gleanings. What they called the Arab Spring showed you what young people can do. NSAS showed you how frustrated young people can behave. But you know the amount of violence that those young people experienced. Many people did not say anything in their defense. You know, we allow things to happen because we think we are powerless, and then we blame whatever. It is God, let us pray, let us fast, which is what the Christians are doing, and then let us call America. It won't solve the problem. So the path to transformation, requires earnest struggle and continuous effort and a realization that nobody will save you, you know. And we have to make the state serve the purpose that it should serve instead of leaving them alone, comfortable in their air-conditioned spaces, all secure with our own money, taking care of themselves, and we are suffering. You know, so finally, if you want to transform, it's not like an exclusive circle of the 1% that should be occupying the powerful positions in our countries. And I know it's hard to run for office. If you don't have money in Nigeria, big money, nobody is going to vote for you. How do you change all this? Education can actually help people to change their mind. Ideas have power. And we give up on our power to influence change. And then we're looking for help in places where it's not going to be given to us. There's nothing like free lunch in international politics.
Thank you so much, Professor Okome. Appreciate it. It's no free lunch in international politics. Not the list, I'm calling on Honorable Dr. Willie Mutunga for your last comments.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Yeah, let me start with the issue of AI, and I want to recommend all of you to read a book that has come out from one of our great African professors, Karim Hiriji, and it's published by Daraja Press, based in Montreal, and the title is Artificial Intelligence, Society and Religion, Crossroads of Algorithm, Neoliberalism, and Faith. I've just read bits of it, but those who are, wanted to follow up this issue, which I think is a very, very, very important issue. There is one of our great professors who was written close to, I think, 700 pages on this issue. The other question I wanted to deal with is a question raised by, the young scholar who was asking our sisters and brothers who are scholars in Nigeria why they can't come home and they replace the rulers, who are there, because she's convinced, you'll be a better leadership, alternative leadership to, what we have. I think it's a great question, because given the case of Kenya, I've seen professors, I've seen who are working in the diaspora, come in to contest for political power, and they join in the politics of division, in the country, or whatever money they had, as my sister, the professor, was saying, they spend it campaigning, but they also professors in the US and other places who will tell you that they have tried very hard, to help our states. Even pro bono, there's a professor in Chicago called Professor James Gathie, who wanted to help Kenya negotiate a trade agreement with the US. And it was going to be, of course, a great resource. But the politician says, lawyers always delay us, we have to sign, and so forth and so forth. So it's not, that easy. Even the Kenyans in the diaspora, have not been allowed to vote as yet. So I wanted just to answer those two questions in the 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would like to, with that, thank all of you for being such wonderful, amazing, patient participants. I know we didn't get through all your questions and comments, but tomorrow I have a lot of responses and ideas. I'd like to thank your office, Madame Duarte, Ndidi and Yegwoman, Teresa Aranaz, all the tech folks, and all of you for being here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you to our panelists. Hand over to the MC for his last word.
And just to say thank you to everyone. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock sharp, we are back here. We are going to be hearing from a gathering of distinguished intellectuals, Professor Lembe Tiki, Professor Leonard Want-Chekon, Professor Leslie Obiora, we heard you a moment ago, Professor Nadej Compaore. Tomorrow we are going to hear more from you. and Ms. Shari Spiegel and the World Bank Group tomorrow. Thank you once again on behalf of Madam Cristina Duarte, the USG. Muito obrigado. Adupe. Dalu. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup. Akpe. Oyiwaladon. Yedamuase. Okay. All right. Thank you. See you tomorrow.